that only a sailor can. On the other end, the family explained to the operator that since he was calling, he must be alive. So there was no reason to waste money on such a luxury as a long-distance phone call. Granddaddy's study was filled with volume after volume of great books, on everything from the history of the U.S. Navy to biographies of Civil War generals. I would often sneak off to this room, pull out one of the volumes, and lose myself in the past. These books shaped me then and stay with me now. One of my most prized possessions is an original edition 1939 Jane's Fighting Ships that my grandfather received as a gift from a Royal Navy officer for being part of the crew that shipped a Lend-Lease destroyer to the Brits. As I type these very words, it peers down at me from the shelf above my computer. My reading fare quickly diverged from that of the other kids at Myers Park Elementary School. A typical afternoon reading was less likely to be exploring how Encyclopedia Brown, boy detective, cracked the case of the missing roller skates than how Audie Murphy, the youngest soldier ever to win the Medal of Honor, went, as he wrote in his autobiography, to hell and back. War soon morphed over into the imaginary world that surrounds all kids like a bubble. Other kids went to Narnia. I went to Normandy. While it may have looked like a normal Diamondback dirt bike, my bicycle was the only one in the neighborhood that mounted twin 50-caliber machine guns on the handlebars to shoot down any marauding Japanese Zeros that dared to ambush me on my way to school each morning. I still remember my mother yelling at me for digging a 5-foot-deep foxhole in our backyard when I was 10 years old. She clearly failed to understand the importance of setting up a proper line of defense. I certainly can't claim to have been a normal kid, but in my defense, you also have to remember the context. To be so focused on war was somewhat easier in that period. It was the Reagan era, and the Cold War had heated back up. The Russians wouldn't come to our Olympics, and we wouldn't go to theirs. The military was cool again, and we had no questions about whether we were the good guys. Most important, as a young Patrick Swayze and Charlie Sheen taught us in Red Dawn, not only were the commies poised to parachute right into our schools, but it was likely us kids who would have to beat them back. What I find interesting, and a sign of the power of Hollywood's marketing machine, is that usually some artifact from science fiction is in the background of these memories, intertwined with the history. For example, when I think back to my childhood bedroom, there are the model warships from my grandfather's era lined up on display, but also Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewbacca peeking up from my Star Wars bedsheets. As most of science fiction involved some good guy battling some bad guy in a world far, far away, the two mims of my fantasy world went together fairly well. In short, your author was the kind of little boy to whom a stick was not a mere piece of wood, but the makings of a machine gun or a lightsaber that could save the world from both Hitler and Darth Vader. War. What is it good for? I look back on these memories with some embarrassment, but also guilt. Of course, even then, I knew that people die in war, and many soldiers didn't come home. But they were always only the buddy of the hero, oddly enough, usually from Brooklyn in most World War II movies. The reality of war had no way of sinking in. It was not until years later that I truly understood the human costs of war. I remember crossing a jury-rigged bridge into Mostar, a town in Bosnia, that saw some of the worst fighting in the Yugoslav Civil War. I was there as part of a fact-finding mission on the UN peacekeeping operation. Weeks of back-and-forth fighting had turned block after block of factories and apartments on the riverfront into a mass of hollowed-out hulks. The pictures of World War II's Stalingrad in an old book on my grandfather's shelf had sprung up to surround and encompass me. The books never had any smell other than dust, but here, even well after the battles, a burnt, fetid scent still hung in the air. Down the river were the remnants of an elegant 500-year-old bridge, which had been blasted to pieces by Serb artillery. The people, though, were the ones who drove it home, haunted.